And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on Deborah Kobylt Live. And please welcome Dr. Nancy Dome, who wrote this terrific book, Let's Talk About Race. A wonderful book. Lots of great nuggets in this book, Doctor. Can I call you Dr. Nancy?
You can call me Dr. Nancy. You can call me Nancy. You can, whatever you like.
I love this book because it's sensible.
Mhm.
And just before the cameras were rolling, we were saying that sometimes people say stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And they don't really mean to be racist. They don't mean to put you off.
Mhm.
Just sometimes they say stupid stuff. So you talk a lot in this book about compassionate dialogue. Let's
Mhm.
talk about compassionate dialogue and then talk about some of the stuff people say that may not necessarily be their true character. Can we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've grown up. So, for example, I grew up in West Hollywood in the '70s, and it was a large Jewish community, and so we knew proper language, when referring to each other. But I grew up saying, gosh, I think I got gypped. And I never made that connection. It was just stuff that it was just something we said, right? And then fast forward 20 years, I'm a professor, and one of my colleagues says, Nancy, please don't say that. And I said, why? She goes, think about it. And when I thought about it, I'm like, wait a second, is it referring to like gypsies? And she says, yes. And
Mm.
so how many times did I say that and possibly offend someone, and someone just write me off as being a racist, or being inconsiderate or thoughtless, all those things, right? And I didn't know any better, and no one corrected me. So I was 32 years old when I finally got corrected about using that terminology. And I think that happens to us a lot. I think that for the most part, we've grown up with language that we really never stop long enough to evaluate what it really means. And so we say things that come across as offensive. And because we rather kind of just cut people out of our lives rather than engage with them, then we lose that opportunity to educate someone. Imagine how many people, how early I could have been educated had someone just spoken up earlier.
Yeah. That's actually very true. I remember being a kid and I would a lot of people would say derogatory terms toward
Hmm.
me being Italian.
Hmm.
And, every name in the book, it would infuriate my parents.
Hmm.
And a different generation, right? Grew up with different stuff. And I
Yeah.
would just look at them and kind of dismiss them, that thinking to myself, they don't know any better. But
Right.
what a great opportunity to try and not teach somebody, but to explain why
Yeah.
that's not so cool. But
Yeah.
you were open to that person telling you that, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes, yeah. So you have to be open to it as well,
Right.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. And you can't take it personally. Like I think part of us get defensive because we're embarrassed that we didn't know something, right? So, oh my, I've said these things. And so what is it like to really create this work environment, or, personal life environment where you trust the person you're talking to? So when they do correct you, it's for your betterment. Like there's nothing about, when Anne-Marie told me that, did I think that she was trying to embarrass me, to shame me, to blame me? She really was truly wanting to educate me so that I knew better. Because then she could decide, if I was like, oh, I knew what it meant, and they are, whatever. If I went that way, then she could have made a decision about me based on fact. But what her belief about me was that I just didn't know better in the moment, and I didn't. And I think that that's a lot of us. I think that people say stupid things all the time, and we're too quick to write them off. So compassionate dialogue is actually a tool for us to engage a little bit deeper to determine, is this just an isolated kind of, I've been saying this my whole life, or I don't know any better, or is this really an indication of the kind of person that I am?
Could you give us some other examples of compassionate dialogue? Um, you know, so that we can compare, not compare, so that we can repair
Yeah.
ourselves, our society, without being too heavy about it, right?
Yeah, the compassion piece really, it shifts the reason why we're engaging. So when you come from a place of compassion, you're truly seeking to understand. That's what compassion is about. It's about understanding, the situation, the other person. And so if I truly want to understand you and who you are, then I'm going to interrupt those microaggressions differently. So I'm still going to interrupt because we need to hold each other accountable for the things that we say and do. right? But if I choose to interrupt you through inquiry, really seeking to understand, like, where is this coming from? Do you understand the origin? What does this mean? What are you really trying to say? Then it leaves room for us to actually connect. Whereas if you say something, or if it was me, saying, oh, I just got gypped, and you just said, you're a racist biatch, then that would be the end of it. And we would have nowhere to go, because now you offended me, I offended you, and we go our separate ways. And now we're talking about each other because we don't have the ability to talk to one another. And so compassionate dialogue says, I'm going to engage with you rather than shut you down. And I'm going to ask questions so that I can be clear on what it is your intention is.
You clearly have to be emotionally ready and able to do that, though, right? All
Yeah.
we have to do
Yeah.
is we have to just turn on the news every night, and there's always one side against the other side, always
Yeah.
fighting. Nobody seems to be listening to anybody.
Yeah.
Gosh, how do we get to a place where we stop and listen? Everything's so heated now.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we have to ask questions, and then, like I said, you alluded to it before we got on the air, but repair is sometimes divorce. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, as you continue to inquire and ask questions of the person you're engaging with, you may discover that they really are just kind of a jerk. And then
Yeah.
your choice to repair is that, I don't have people in my life like that. And so
Right.
I'm not going to engage anymore. But at least when I'm disengaging, I am choosing it, right? And I'm choosing it based on the information you have given me, as opposed to just hearing something and making assumptions about what that means.
Mm. In your book, you talk about 4 different communication styles, and also different affects that we have about that. Can you talk
Mhm.
about that for my audience?
Yeah, so I talk about communication styles because I think one of the biggest pieces of compassionate dialogue is understanding what type of communicator you are, right? We
Mm.
need to know when we walk in, like, I know that I'm very personal. So there's 4 types. There's functional, which is, they lead with process, they're very systematic, they like step by step, they like order, right? And there's the analytical, who likes to lead with data, who wants all the information, and they really avoid emotions. Well, I'm a personal communicator, which means I lead with emotion. So you can imagine me and an analytical person. I'm talking about how I feel and what this means to me. And the analytical person is just dealing with facts. And so we're already kind of bumping heads because we're approaching a situation from completely different corners. And so, but by me understanding that I'm very emotional and that you may be more analytical, we can try to meet in the middle, where you have to make room for me to show up in my style, and I have to allow room for you to show up as well, right? And so us understanding our communication styles actually kind of gives us the tools that we need to walk in knowing, okay, I'm very emotional and personal and intuitive. And so once I hear you talk, I already know that you might trigger me. So I'm gonna mitigate my own emotions so that I can kind of meet you where you are, instead of just
Mm.
shutting you down. So that's understanding your styles. And then on top of the styles, you can think of this like a layer cake, right? You've got your foundational kind of primary and secondary communication styles, and then you have your affects. And the 4 affects are assertive, passive, aggressive, and passive aggressive. And so I think that we can tend to be one, but we can move around
Yeah.
those affects easily, depending. Like when I'm with my sister, I'm aggressive, and when I'm, with my husband, I'm assertive. And, sometimes in work situations, I could be passive aggressive. And so understanding what are those situations that elicit those different affects, so that we can show up. Because again, if I'm showing up and it's being interpreted as aggressive, and I'm trying to be assertive, then we got to kind of start to understand, what does it look like, and what do these definitions mean, so that we know what we're dealing with when we're talking to the other person, but also how I show up. So if I'm fearful, I may move to aggressive state, right? And so I know that when
Mm.
I'm recognizing and fear comes up for me, I'm going to have to mitigate my aggression. right? I'm going to have to put that under control because my aggression is how I protect myself. And what I have to do is allow myself to just be vulnerable for a minute, to ask the question, to find out, is this an instance where I have to protect myself, or where I can kind of just take that deep breath, ride my emotional wave, and really try to meet the person where they are. So it really is an opportunity for me to know myself better, so that I can kind of get out of my own way when we're communicating.
You really have to be of a certain headspace though to be able to recognize that, right? Like I have a great example of this. I had to get knee surgery, and
Okay.
boy was I was so terrified. I didn't want to
Hmm.
do it. I kept putting it off. And the surgeon I chose, I remember I went into his office that day, and he was very methodically, and he was very going through it and very analytical. And I burst into tears because I was so scared. And he looked at me and he goes, "Go get yourself some help and come back to me." I thought,
Oh my
oh my
goodness.
gosh. No, but wait, I'll tell you what happened. And I told that to a couple of people, and they said, I would never use him, whatever, but he's a terrific surgeon. And I know that. And I thought, well, he's got a really good team. He has a
Mhm.
compassionate team. So let me figure out how I can
Right.
reorient what I'm doing, because maybe I'm just freaking him out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had to really think about that. And when
Yeah.
I went back to see him, I said, I actually talked to somebody about my anxiety over this. I'm ready to do it. And he then calmed down with me,
Yeah.
and he was a lot more personal with me. And by the time the surgery was over and I went back because I had to get a second surgery, I was like,
Mhm.
I'm ready. And I was like his number one patient. He goes, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, how do you go from being like, I had to stop and think about what was I doing to
Absolutely.
maybe, you know, kind of freak him out a little bit. Like we just have to think about it, right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's exactly, I mean, you just gave a perfect example of that dynamic of you understanding you're showing up in this kind of personal space. He's extremely analytical. You're not
Yeah.
meshing, right? And so you needed something from him though, and so you had to figure out. And even in his abrupt way, he told you what he needed from you, right?
Exactly.
It was and that's a decentering and depersonalizing. Like if we could, most people, like your friends recommended, would say, he's a jerk, go get another surgeon. But but that's because they took it personally. And so if we
Right.
can not take it personally, and hear what he's not saying, which is, you're stressing me out showing up this way, I can't work under this, you showed up differently for him, and then he was able to meet you. And that really is both of you kind of meeting in the middle. He met you in your personal place, and you met him in his analytical, and you were able to work together in that neutral space.
But to your point with your book and even the title of your book, Let's Talk About Race. So often we don't hear each other.
Mhm.
We're just not hearing what the other people's saying, or we hear what we want to hear out of what they
Yeah.
said. Um, how do we? Is it education? Is it just stopping and thinking? How does a person get to the point? Otherwise, things get too heated. And that's an issue that I have about society. I just feel like everything's so heated all the time. Nobody's stopping to just read a book like this, or just realize that someone didn't mean it to be personal. What are
Mhm.
some skills that you can tell our audience that really have helped you and other people to not take
Well,
things so personal? Go ahead.
funny enough, I'm going to bring another book into the mix, and that's Don Miguel Ruiz's Four Agreements. I
Right.
mean, those four agreements, if you they seem very easy, but they're not. And if you can do them, they really help center you, right? So
What are they? Wait, what are they? Could you
so
list to
it's
our audience again?
okay, yes. Let me see if I can pull it out. Don't take it personally. Be impeccable with your word. Oh my goodness. Oh, come on. Oh, now see, I'm under pressure. I'll pull it up and get it. But those are the two. Always speak your truth. No, but that's be impeccable with your word. Don't take it personally. I got to get that. I got to get the other two. I'll get them.
That's okay, because I actually get the point. And what you're saying is, to be the person. I mean, actually, if you could explain it to us.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So I got lost. So go back to the question. What's the initial thing that we want to?
How do we get to that point where we don't take
Oh yeah.
things so personally? Yeah.
It's really, it requires that we are willing to take a risk and be vulnerable. And I think that is probably the biggest factor that gets in our way, is that if I feel like you are threatening to me, whether it's emotional, well, and I'm not even going to go to the physical because that's a whole different thing. But like if I feel threatened or intimidated, not just me, but our natural response is to protect ourselves. But when I protect myself, I can't hear you. If my brain, if my amygdala is hijacked and I'm in this kind of fight or flight, there's no way we can have effective communication. And so what the ask is, and it's not easy, but the more you practice, the better you get at it, is how do you um even in those moments where you're feeling, nervous and anxiety, how do you take the risk and say, I'm going to be vulnerable in this moment? And it's counterintuitive. And so that's why the inquiry, when you ask that question, that first question to interrupt, it's doing two things. One, it's putting the responsibility back on the other person to explain themselves, right? To tell you what they mean. But it's also giving you a few minutes to catch your breath and to kind of regain your higher level functioning of your brain so that you can interact in a kind of meaningful, cognizant way, right? Because when your brain, when you got that adrenaline flowing, you're not going to respond the way that you would if you were calmed and collected. So asking that first question buys you time so that your brain can regain control, and then you can engage differently. And then you begin to find out that, in many circumstances, asking the right question really leads you to a place of having a conversation. And when the other person really believes that you are truly trying to understand them instead of trying to tell them that they're wrong about something, you usually find that kind of like with your doctor, that compromise, right? It's not like I'm making you wrong, but you're also willing to meet me where I am, so that we can have a different dialogue.
Let's talk a little bit about you and your personal life. You said you grew up in West Hollywood.
Yeah.
You live in not royal, rural Missouri. Is that right?
Montana.
Montana. Oh, I am so sorry. I can't help
No
it.
worries.
You are an African American woman living in a rural area, and your husband is white. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was there anything when you first moved to that rural area? I don't know if it's predominantly African American or white. I really don't know, but I'm going to make a presumption that it was not.
Correct.
Was it a situation where it's like, wait, who's she? And did you sort of have to turn that around? Were people obviously they're very accepting of you, but what was it like to be
Well,
someone moving into an area that looked different?
yeah, so the upside for me in this instance was that I have been visiting this particular town for over 10 years. I started off going to the town for work. So I was coming 4 times a year because I was sitting on a board. And so I got to meet the people there. I got to meet the town, just got to see how the town worked. And after about 6 years, I decided that I'd like to find a little place. And initially I thought about it being like a summer home, someplace I could go to get out of the city. And then on one of my trips, I met my husband. And so that kind of shifted things. But when we decided to move into this town, it really had more to do with COVID happened. We had this house. It was 500 people in the town. So, we had an experience during COVID where we weren't as impacted as we would have been if we were in a larger city. And so, and I think the thing about small communities is that you realize you're dependent on your neighbors. You can't, there's no cell phone service. There's no major big box stores. And so you really talk to your neighbors, you depend on your neighbors, and you build relationships. And relationships are key to breaking down barriers that we perceive exist between us.
I like that we perceive exists
Mhm.
between us. I
Mhm.
think that's critical that we
Mhm.
perceive. It's often in our minds.
Yeah.
That's actually a terrific one. What do you want our audience to know, to leave with about your book and your teachings? Could you share with us?
Yeah, the title, "Let's Talk About Race and Other Hard Things." Um, when I thought about coming up with that title, it was really about how do we begin to have these tough conversations that we need to have. Race religion, politics. These are some of the most important pieces of our identity. And yet these are the things that we can't talk about at all with each other. In fact, we go through two extremes to kind of make sure that they don't come up in polite conversation, right? And so this idea that we need to normalize talking about race so that we can deconstruct the construct. We know that race is a social construct, but it's a real thing that exists here as a construct that we can't dismantle until we understand it. And so just saying I'm colorblind or I don't see race, that's actually contributing to the problem, because you don't want to see it, but I'm still impacted daily by it. Right? You're impacted daily by it. We're each impacted daily. So to ignore something, it's like, I'm not going to pay attention to this rash that's coming out of my hand. I'm just going to ignore it and it's going to go away. Well, it doesn't just go away. And neither do our issues. And so we have to, if I can ask of anything, it's like, what would it look like to lean in into compassionate dialogue with each other and be open to what can come out of those conversations, and how do we give each other grace in the moments when we're not showing up at our best?
I love that. How do we give each other grace when we're not showing up at our best? Another great example of that is politics. We talked about how very often someone will assume that someone who is politically conservative is sort of a jerk, right? A lot of times. And someone who's on the other spectrum, who's politically liberal, is just sort of out there and woo woo. So, right there's a great example of not just assuming anything of anybody, right? Could you speak
Right.
to that?
Yeah, I think that we have to wait for proof, right? We have to, it's too easy to look at someone and think that you know everything about them because you looked at them. I can't tell you how my first experience in college, when I was transferring, I made a video. I played volleyball and I was going for a scholarship, and I made a video, and I spoke to the coach on the phone, and I sent the video to him, and it was me, a Latina girl who was my setter, and then another biracial girl who was helping me shag balls. And I sent him the video, and because in his mind, he had decided that I was white because of the way I sounded, that he literally, it's this cognitive dissonance where he's looking at the video, there's 3 women of color, and he can't determine who I am, even though the video was focused on me. He couldn't tell.
Wow.
Because in his mind, I didn't fit the picture that he had, and it made him blind completely to who I was. And anyone else with just a little deduction, because if I got my camera on you, Deborah, then you know that the video is about you, right? And he couldn't do it, so he had to call and ask me. And I think that's it. Like, in his mind, I sounded white. Volleyball was predominantly a white sport, so he couldn't get his head around how I was the one who he spoke to on the telephone. And so he kept, even though he had this perception about what it meant. There was 2 Black players on the team. I did come from a poor family, but my other teammate didn't. But he just assumed because we were Black, we were poor. So he would always put extra money in our travel per diem stipend and so all these things he did because he never asked the question once to find out, does your family have resources? Are you, do you have enough? He just assumed we were Black, we were poor. Right?
Wow.
So these are the things, and was it well-meaning? He wasn't trying to harm us. He wasn't trying to, he was actually trying to care for us, but it was from a deficit belief that all Black people are a certain way, right? And so we really, and I think that what we see, especially politically now, are those kind of same assumptions about who each other are. I see a MAGA hat, this is what I believe. You see a Black person, this is what you believe. We have all these things, and until we're willing to just sit down and talk with each other, we're never going to be able to heal the wounds, and we have to heal the wounds. We can't continue to thrive as a country as separated as we are right now.
That is a fantastic thing to end on. And I guess one important thing to do is listen, right?
Yes. Key.
Listen,
Key.
listen.
Key.
Yeah.
And I found those 4 agreements for you. So it's be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Imagine.
Sometimes it's a good idea to wake up in the morning and just read
Yeah.
just read it.
Yeah.
And then carry that with
Yeah.
you throughout the day, and just
Yeah.
try and do that. Try and stick to that.
Yeah.
And it might seem like it's trite or whatever, but it's really not. If you just go through it, read it in the morning. Some people will read their prayer, some people will meditate, maybe just incorporate this into all of that. I really believe that we start to change our thinking in our heads.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And we need that contact. Contact theory really talks about we're going to dismantle these deficit beliefs about people, but it's going to be through contact, through building and making relationships with each other. So the more we can have exposure to people who look different from us, who believe different than us, who pray different than us, that the more allowing and accepting we become of these differences.
yeah, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
It's a good way to be. It's a
Yeah.
good way to be.
Yeah.
Gosh, Dr. Nancy Dome, I'm so appreciative that you came on our show. I hope our audience picks up Let's Talk About Race,
Mhm.
award-winning book. It's an easy read. It's a smart read. I enjoyed every word of it, and it taught me quite a bit. And I then opened up the dialogue with friends of mine, and we even thought about having this as a book club, because I
Oh,
actually
cool.
think it's a really cool book to share with my friends. So thank you very, very much, Doctor, for coming on our show. And how can people reach out to you?
They can reach me on drnancydome.com. That's drnancydome.com. And also they can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm there, and I like actually engaging on that platform as well. So, and then for my company, it's epiceducation.com, which is EPOCH education.com.
Thank you so much. Please pick
Yeah.
up the book, Let's Talk About Race. Reach out to Dr. Nancy Dome as well. And I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate our audience engaging in this dialogue as well. You can find our full interview here on Deborah Kobylt Live anywhere, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, and then on all audio platforms of a podcast, including iHeartRadio and just about anything else. So thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. Thank you to our audience, and communicate, listen, be
Yeah.
well. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.